Welcome back to another pre-conference anticipation mini-episode. Today's guest, you've heard him as a previous guest on the podcast, as a winner of the Service Design Award, as a visitor of the conference, and this time as an organizer of the Service Design Global Conference. Welcome back, Chris Ferguson.
Hey, good to speak to you again. Thanks for having me back.
Yeah, Chris, I actually think it's already the fourth time you are on this podcast. Is that true?
I think that's true, because I spoke to you minutes before the award ceremony, after the award, and then at the conference as when I was a spectator. So, yeah. And it's always a pleasure. And
Great.
And I'm really excited you're doing this and so excited that you're going to be coming and joining us here in Canada.
Oh, yes, we are too. Could you maybe still introduce yourself another time for the listeners who are listening for the first time to the podcast?
All right. Well, my name is Chris Ferguson, and I'm the founder of a service design consultancy in Toronto, Canada, which is called Bridgeable. And I also teach design at the University of Toronto. I teach at the Rotman School of Management to business students, and I also teach at the University of Toronto's Law School, teaching an executive master's program in innovation technology in the law. And my final role is as the co-lead of the Canadian chapter of the Service Design Network.
All right. And now you're going to be one of the organizers of the next Service Design Conference. How did that go about? How did you end up getting involved with organizing this conference?
Well, we started our chapter, I believe, 4 years ago now. And for the last 3 years, we've been organizing and running a national conference. The first 2 years in Toronto, and then this past year, we ran a bilingual conference in Montreal. And when we started the local chapter and started the local service design group, we talked about this idea of having the global conference. And, 4 or 5 years ago, this felt like a pretty far-fetched dream that we would actually be able to host the global community here. It was still a fairly nascent practice here in Canada, service design. And although over the last few years, as we've been running our national conference, there's been more and more interest, and almost every industry, from healthcare to financial services, telco, and government, and you're seeing service design jobs now pop up everywhere. And so there's been this real growth of the service design community here. And so last year we decided to submit a bid to be the host country and the host city here in Toronto, and they accepted it. So now we're going to be hosting on October 10th and 11th here in Toronto.
Oh, and how is the preparation going? Is the program is all set, I see. How is it coming to that point, making the decisions about who to invite, which selections to make? Can you talk a bit about that process?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's always challenging. It's challenging when we do this nationally because there's so many great speakers and so much great content. That was only, tenfold the challenge this year. So what we did is there was an open call for presenters and workshops, and we established a international group of practitioners that went through and vetted all of the different submissions. So there were a number of different spreadsheets set up, and we had representatives from different countries around the world that would go through and evaluate the quality and the novelty of the different presentations and workshops. And in a way that was really nice. It was great to have different people's point of view. It was done as a blinded process, so you didn't know the organizations that people were representing. So it was really based on the merits of what had been submitted and the quality of the proposed content. So we went through. There was, after that process of having the different international team evaluate, there was a top list of the top rated. And then it was a matter of going through and looking at things like, gender diversity, international diversity, ensuring that we had representation of different kinds of topics and there wasn't too much overlap. And then again, ensuring that there wasn't too much from individual organizations. And then on top of that, there was a number of people who were contacted directly as invited speakers, including some of the keynotes.
Yeah, I actually also went through some of the talks and thought it was great to see so many different topics, but I thought it was only just one bit of the talks and it was already so difficult to choose. There were so many interesting topics that I was thinking like, oh, I would like to see that, or this would be interesting as well.
Yeah.
So I can imagine it's a very hard process to go to and to make the final decisions as a team.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, there's 7 tracks of content. So at any time, you could be in 7 different locations, and they're all such high quality. And in certain cases, there are things where either I'd invited them or it's something that's just really relevant to the work I'm doing right now. So you feel you feel really torn, and you wish you could somehow, attend multiple things at the same time. But yeah, it's I feel really good about the content, and speaking to Alex and Jamin, who are the organizers from the global committee, who have been organizing for many years now. I mean, they were really impressed and really satisfied with the quality and diversity of the content. So I think it's going to be a great year.
Did you also look for workshops and talks that were related to the topic of this year, like building bridges? And can you maybe also explain a bit more what this topic means to you as a service designer?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd first like to say the caveat that although I run a service design consultancy called Bridgeable, that had no bearing on the name of building bridges. It was actually Alex Nesbitt who had recommended it, and it was only after the fact that he said, "Oh, Chris, I realized that you run a consultancy with a bridge name," and
I only realize it now when you say it.
Yeah. And so I am a big fan of the metaphor of building bridges. If you think about the work we do as service designers, we're often connecting between different stakeholders or different silos within an organization. You could be working with the line of business, or the department that's leading things, the internal research group, the digital team, the team doing retail environments or call center, different, all the different components of a service experience. So often our role is actually as that builder of bridges between the different stakeholders. And so I think that's a position we're used to managing. I'd also say we're often thinking about building bridges between the experience of the customer, the experience of the frontline staff, and then the management and the kind of operational elements. So there's that element as well, is thinking about who are the different stakeholders and how do you balance their needs. So those are all really key components. But I would say the aspiration for the conference is that ability for us to build bridges, that ability that we play, the role we often play in projects, is actually, can we be doing even more of that in a world where there's so much polarization, where there's so much divisiveness, and where technology is really reducing our ability to collaborate, to cooperate, and to negotiate with one another. Can we as service designers play an even more significant role in helping bring people together and co-create value? And whether that's with different kinds of stakeholders or between the private sector and the public sector, how can we amplify our role as someone who brings people together and helps them co-create?
Mm-hmm. Do you think, I'm sure that we as service designers have already some very important skills here, like being positive, problem solving, co-creating, but I also believe there are still some gaps that we have in bringing different groups of people together. What do you think are like the biggest barriers we're still facing, or knowledge that we're not implementing yet?
Bridges that we're still missing.
Bridges to build. Yeah, great question. I, my feeling on that is one of the big challenges I find for service designers doing work across these different kinds of stakeholder groups is that often different kinds of stakeholders have their own worldview or their own mindset, and it could be the ways in which they measure things, it could be the things that they value, it could be the language they use to describe things, their own terminology, or their own KPIs or key performance indicators that they use as a team or as a group. And I think that our because designers tend to be optimistic and we tend to be creative, and we can often see the world the way in which we would like it to be. We're idealistic in that way, and that's a great strength. I think that can often be a challenge when it comes to working across different kinds of stakeholders where trade-offs have to be made. And I think that often those different mindsets are not compatible with one another, and that there is, in some cases, there's just it's a win-lose scenario. Both parties can't win. And I think that we can do a better job of being explicit about where are the areas in which this group is not going to where there's going to be losers and there's going to be winners. So that's one part of it. I think that we often would like to think that everyone can get along and everyone can get everything out of it. And I think we often don't like to face those kinds of realities. So that's certainly one. I mean, I would say the other is this tension around business metrics and more of the logic by which organizations are managed, and kind of management, the dominant logic of management, and that only things that matter are the things that can be measured and the things that can be quantified. And I think that that's a logic which is very different than the logic of design, which looks at qualitative phenomena, it looks at experience, it uses creativity as a way to problem solve. And I think that the temptation is to try to make what's a qualitative creative process, that circle fit in the square of business, to try to change the ways in which design is practiced in order for it to fit that logic. And I think that often that comes at the cost of a lot of what makes design special. And I think really celebrating that it is different. It's a different way of solving problems. It's a different way of working, and it has a lot of benefit. And it can drive business value, but the ways in which it's run, the ways in which it's measured are different than how management is traditionally organized and how it's taught and how it's practiced. So that's another area I think that designers thinking about how do we then stand up for the craft of what we do and connect with the business community in a way that doesn't compromise or simplify design to being a series of steps that you go through. Well, all I have to do is go through these 5 steps and check these boxes, and then I've designed something. And kind of it takes away the craft. And I think that the more we can be better at articulating the value, articulating the difference between how these worlds work, I think that's a bridge that I think we've yet to cross when it comes to practicing design in business.
Can we expect any of the sessions to delve into these topics? Are there any particular speakers that you are looking forward to, for instance?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's 2 that are spot on this topic. There is one of the first talks in the opening on day 1 is Dr. Josina Vink, which I don't know if you're familiar with. Have you 2 come across Josina? So Josina is recently became a professor at AHO, the Architecture and Design School in Oslo, and looks at service design within healthcare. That's her specialization. Josina's Canadian, and I know her from here. She did her PhD and is now teaching in Europe. And her work looks at the idea of invisible social structures. So if you think about when you do a design project, you could do really great research and you could come up with a really great artifact in the end. But if you didn't change the mindsets, if you didn't really understand the culture of the organization and get people inside the organization to kind of come along and understand what needs to be done differently in the future, then after the project, they'll quickly revert to their old way of working and they'll destroy what you created. So what her work looks at is how do we as service designers become better at understanding these social structures that are the cultures in which our clients or the organizations where we work, and how do you think about both understanding them but also transforming them as part of the service design process?
That's interesting. I have a feeling that now often we are like, if we stay in the metaphor of bridges, that we're building our own service design island often, instead of making it a bridge, that we think that next to all the different parts of an organization, we have to put service design also next to it and also bring it in as a certain discipline. But I think it would be more interesting, and how I hear you talking about her presentation, I hope she will explain that. But I think it would be more interesting if we indeed understand more of the different parts of the organization and don't always call it service design, but just bring them together, of course, with our own tool sets, but not putting another island next to it, which sounds more easy than it is, I would say.
For sure. How do we actually facilitate that ability to co-create versus create another silo inside another department inside an organization that's contributing to the issue?
And also, I think as a service designer, you can feel that there is a huge elephant in the room somewhere, but you're not able to find it. There's things people are not talking about, and having a good way of dealing with and bringing those up would be very valuable. I think it's something we do from intuition and experience today, but it sounds like a really interesting topic.
Yeah, for sure. And there's many other really exciting talks that I think are just very representative of this idea of building bridges. There's a talk that's going to be, the opening keynote is going to be a gentleman by the name of Jesse Wente, who is a broadcaster on the CBC, which is our national broadcaster here in Canada, and he's part of the National Council for the Arts. And he is Ojibwe, so he's a First Nations native to Canadian. And he is going to talk about how art and design can be used as ways in which to bridge the cultures of more of the European and colonial cultures and First Nations cultures, and how they can really bring out the best of both of them and really celebrate these cultures, and as a way to work towards more reconciliation of how we can work together as cultures, which is a big challenge that's occurring here in Canada, given our historic treatment of First Nations people.
I remember several years ago when the conference was in Amsterdam, the hosts, they arrived on bicycles. Last year in Dublin, there was an Irish band who came on the stage to wake everybody up. Are you going to be giving the conference a bit of a Canadian flavor this year?
Yes, although I don't know what that is. I mean, there's going to be there's going to be a number of different activities, and the location is going to be at a place called Evergreen Brickworks, which was a decommissioned brick factory that produced many of the bricks of what built Toronto. That's in a valley, a kind of forested valley that's been restored just outside of downtown. So I think that idea of being in nature but being in the city kind of feels very Canadian, and this kind of appreciation for nature. It's funny, we were, it's hard to think about exactly, we had this discussion about exactly what would we do at the beginning in order to come up with something that's adequately Canadian. And I'm not sure what that is. And maybe as the deadline approaches, the pressure will lead to some creative thinking. So you'll have to see when you get here.
Great. Okay, so the conference is in less than a month. Mm-hmm. What will the coming weeks bring for you? What do you still have to do before the conference? Will there be some pre-conference rush still, or are you pretty calm before everyone's moving to Toronto?
Yeah. I mean, a lot of it's the details around the logistics of things like signage and managing volunteers and managing the venue, and some more of the kind of behind the scenes elements of how the logistics will work at the event. It's funny, when we run the conference nationally the last 3 years, someone on our team who I work with, Maria Bélanger, has created this experience deck that walks through as if you were a participant going through the experience, and walks through all the different touch points of the experience. And so we're creating that to think about things like, where's the appropriate places to put signs, how would the sign up work, how do we ensure that people can move easily between different locations of talks and workshops. So we're working through a lot of those more logistical details to make sure that everything will run smoothly, and that we're staying true to our, we're designing a good service experience, which would be...
You know how to do that, right?
Yeah, exactly. And it's kind of embarrassing if you can't pull that off for our own conference. So we're hoping that we can do that as seamlessly as possible. So it's a lot of those elements. And then, part of what I'm thinking about, and the local team's thinking about as well, is how do we ensure that we're, hospitable and gracious hosts when people come? What are the ways in which we can help make people feel comfortable, both in and around the conference, but also certainly while they're attending? And what are those little elements that'll just help people feel welcome? And I will say, I remember my first service design conference was Berlin, and I believe it was 2010. And I really felt something different about this community, that they're much more open, they're much more collegial and collaborative than other kinds of conferences and events I'd been to before. And so we want to ensure that there's that same sense comes through when people attend the service design conference here in Toronto.
Right. We previously spoke to Shana Segal and asked her about some tips for Toronto. She sent us in the direction of the different Chinatowns and where we could find some good local foods. Do you have any tips for people coming from outside of Canada to Toronto, something they need to see outside of the conference?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, Toronto is really a city of neighborhoods, I'd say, and I recommend people go to neighborhoods such as Kensington Market, which is a neighborhood where there's all of these different kinds of food vendors and little grocery shops and nice little places to eat. But there's, there'll be Tibetan place, and then a Central American place, and then a Jamaican place. Like, it's really representative of the international spirit of Toronto. I think Kensington's a great example, and it's a neighborhood that's, you won't find any. It's all kind of small businesses that are there as well. So that's a great area to check out. There's so many. There's an interesting neighborhood that's called the Distillery District. That was where all of the liquor was being produced, and that was very built up during Prohibition in the U.S. when we were a major exporter of liquor across the lake to the United States. And so there's these, kind of buildings from the 1800s and 1900s, and cobblestones and things that are unique from a North American point of view, and some of the remnants of that early industrial age here in Toronto. I would definitely recommend, though. I mean, there's an island right beside Toronto in the lake called Toronto Island that you can take a ferry to, that has no cars, and it's really, you're right next to a city of 5 million people, but all you can hear is birds singing, and there's trees, and so that's a pretty interesting experience. And then just north of Toronto, there are all of these wonderful nature sites with, literally thousands of lakes and forests and just really abundant nature. So if people were coming from more than a few days for the conference, I'd recommend that they head north to places like Algonquin Park, which is a huge park that's bigger than some of the states in the U.S. You can drive to, get in a canoe, and 5 minutes later see a moose, see beavers, see a lot of wildlife, and in that contrast of nature and urban, I think would be a really nice experience for people, particularly I think coming from Europe, where there's just not as much quick access to that kind of really dense nature that's pretty intact.
Yeah, oh, we are both sitting here like, we wish we would have more time in Toronto. Unfortunately, only have the weekend, but I think the island might be something we will be exploring. So that's a good tip. And then, of course, all the food, we have to try it. Seems to be a thing with service designers and food. When we ask
Yeah.
what should we do in Toronto, everyone just names what we should eat. So, and we love that as well.
Well, it's a funny thing, Toronto's the most multicultural city in the world. It's more than 50% of the people who live in Toronto are from different parts of the world, not even other parts of Canada. They're from, like, they've immigrated here. And so there's this really interesting, if you spend time and you walk around and you go to different neighborhoods, as I mentioned. So if you started on, Queen Street West and went to the park, and then you headed north, you could go through an area that's very Portuguese and Brazilian, and then on Dundas Street, and then if you went a few blocks north of there, you'd be in an area that's very Korean, and you can walk around and almost have this feeling like you're in a transporter, because you'll walk by and there'll be like a Portuguese restaurant. Everyone speaks Portuguese. It's very authentic. And then you walk a few blocks, and then you walk by a Korean karaoke place where everyone's singing, and
Great.
And then you walk a few more blocks, and you're in Chinatown, and you can get authentic Chinese. So you really, it's really cool to be able to, and it's also excellent to be able to explore the food, because you get all this amazing food, and it's really like, what do you want to try? Do you want to try Ethiopian? Do you want to try? It's essentially every culture in the world is here. So it's really a great playground for your palate.
Right, it all sounds too great. So for the people who up until now have not yet got a ticket for the conference, are there tickets still available?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. There's still tickets for the conference. The Members Day event is sold out. It sold out a while ago, but there's still tickets for the main event, and yeah, it's a pretty big capacity at this venue. So I know there's already a lot of people coming, which is great, but there is still tickets if people are interested.
Great.
Okay, so having listened to Chris, I think I'm sure a couple of people will be convinced definitely to come now. Thank you, Chris. It's always good to have a chat with you, and I'm looking a lot more forward to the conference even than before we talked.
Okay, great. Yeah, I'm so glad, and I'm really excited to see you all again there, and yeah, can't wait to see you.
Great. See you in Toronto. Bye.
Okay, sounds good. See ya.
Bye. The Service Design Podcast was brought to you by the Service Design Network and Night Moves. For more information, previous episodes, or to join the conversation, please visit servicedesignpodcast.com. For more information about the Service Design Network, visit service-design-network.org, and for Night Moves, visit nightmoves.be. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider subscribing to this podcast. The intro and outro music is from If the Stars Grow Dim Tonight by Hydrogen Sea featuring I Will, I Swear. Until next time.